everyone, and welcome to Call Your Hits, a Storm Riders Airsoft podcast. Thanks for joining us. If you remember in our very first episode, we talked about how Airsoft is different things for different people. So maybe you're hardcore in a milsim, or maybe you're just casually interested in a few weekend games. When it comes to Airsoft, a regular skirmish game will be full of players with different goals, expectations, and ideas of what fun is for them. And like we said, none of them are particularly right or wrong.
Sometimes one of them will bring a sword.
Yeah. Now, this can sometimes lead to situations, though, where some people feel others are either taking it too seriously or, conversely, not taking it seriously enough, not trying hard enough.
That would be me.
Yes, always Pat. That being said, so today we want to take some time to talk through some of these different mindsets, to really discuss around how none of them are necessarily right or wrong, but most importantly, what can we all do to go about this differently to make sure that games are as fun as possible for everyone and that everyone has a good time, even if the particular game that you're playing might not be exactly what you find the most fun or someone else might feel about your particular game mode. To have this conversation about perspectives, we've got with us Chris. Chris is one of the team's most experienced members, and we've actually had a few conversations in the past about, what we want to get out of the sport and how we approach the sport. So we thought it'd be really great for Chris to join us to have this conversation. So Chris, thanks so much for joining us.
Anytime, man.
So I think the first thing we want to talk about is really when I think about when you started playing with us back in the day, your mindset was just, and I remember the very first game that we ever played, it was you and Miles and Jason, actually, I think, the very, very first game. And
Stalingrad, right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah, at Frontline. And it was all just all right, well, let's just try and integrate ourselves the best as we can and do the best job we can. And not that you're not trying to do that still today, but there's this, as a new player, you're just trying to figure out, okay, what's going on the field, right? What am I doing with this gear? I don't know anything about the field. I don't know about anything about what my guns can do. Although that was probably the case with you. The field, maybe, but the guns and stuff you were probably used to. But that creates a unique mindset for you right away, right? How has your mindset changed over the years? I mean, I just said briefly, you would want to just be the best player you could back then, and I think that's still true now, right?
Yeah, and I guess that just fueled everything. I mean, I started looking on YouTube, looking everywhere just to find things for kit, for techniques, for tactics, and all that kind of thing. But something I realized pretty quickly is that not everybody feels that way. And then, on our team, luckily, most everybody does feel that way, and that's why we work well as a team. But I think it's important to understand that not everybody you're going to play with feels like that. And you've got to learn certain ways to try and get everybody on board with what you're trying to do.
Yeah, and I think there's also this subset of players, especially very, very beginners. And we've seen some of these people who they have never ever played Airsoft before, and they're coming out to an Airsoft game for the very first time. They don't even know what they enjoy yet. They don't really know anything about anything. They don't know how the guns perform. They don't know how they perform. They don't know what people's play styles are. They're just sort of there, and that will continue for a while. You may not know what you find fun in Airsoft immediately, right?
Yeah, definitely. You've got to try out a variety of different game types, different fields if you can, playing in different positions. And what a lot of players will try and do is come in as if they know what they're going to do for the rest of their Airsoft career. So they're going to buy a $600 gun right away. They're going to buy all this great kit because that's what they know that at that point what they want to do, when that's not the case at all.
I mean, I've certainly known exactly what I want for Airsoft several times.
Exactly.
And that's evolved over time, and I think that's part of playing the game. I think that's normal and probably good, but if we can help people save a little bit of money and not buy the $800 bolt action sniper rifle for their first gun, then we've done something useful with this, right?
And that's what we try and recommend, right? Buy a combat machine or something, an entry-level rifle that's sort of multi-purpose, so then you can actually see how the game is played. Because, for instance, everybody wants to be a sniper until they get a sniper and realize that you're not playing Call of Duty.
Yeah, that's right. And that was literally my case, for example, right?
One of the things that I don't really reflect on enough is how daunting it can probably be to come out to a game for your first time. Especially in terms of I'm a big dude. I look pretty scary looking when you put me in camouflage. I've got a deep voice and a big bushy beard and a large rifle. So I may not be aesthetically the most approachable I could possibly be at an Airsoft game. But it's really important for me that new players know that we want new players. Like, I want more players. I want more players to play the game. I want to help them get as good as they can be as quickly as possible, because then I have more incentive to try harder and work harder to be a better player myself, right?
Yeah, well, it's like I've said multiple times, but the rising tide lifts all boats, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And that's an important dynamic. One of the challenges, though, is that by virtue of us doing that, you get people looking at sort of us or, any other players really going like, man, these guys try too hard. That's a comment that I've read on several of our YouTube videos being like, why do you guys care so much? It's just airsoft, right? Just reload your gun. Who cares?
I really hate that idea of just like, oh, you're trying too hard. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't care how hard you play, whether you're on my team or not. Like if you are on my team and you want to goof around. Whatever, that's fine. If you're not on my team and you want to goof around, great, have fun. It's your game. But I'm never going to look at someone and go, man, you're trying too hard or you're goofing around too much. I'm just going to go, hey, we're here having fun. Great. Yeah. No one should look at someone and go, oh, he's trying too hard, right? It's really either you're going, oh, I think he's taking this too seriously, which is a different thing to say and has, I think, some value in conversation, right? We've met players who take this game too seriously at times, I've been players who take this game too seriously at times. But if you're looking at people and getting pissed off and you're going, oh man, like he's doing it really well, but he's trying too hard, I think you're trying to excuse your own not performing well. And I think you're better off looking at that and going, okay, how can I improve my performance? What can I do to do better at this thing that I'm clearly invested in doing better in, rather than going like, oh, it's just a reload. Well, if you don't want to get better at it, honestly, our content's perhaps not for you.
Well, yeah. So, Chris, I think on the team, you're probably the guy who's spent the most time like researching and reading about, I would say, optimal performance in terms of gear. Like whenever I've had an idea of I'm going to change something about my kit, it's almost always been because of a conversation that you and I have had, or me seeing you done something and going, oh, wow, that's a good idea. I should do that too. I use a chest rig all this year because you're like, Phil, plate carriers are stupid. And I was like, well, Chris is saying it, so maybe. So then I try it, right? And I mean, I'm exaggerating.
I get a chest rig. He's like, whatever, Pat.
In fairness, I've known him a lot less time than I've known you, and it's a lot easier to ignore you. I've built up that muscle memory.
That's true. It's a skill.
But so how do you then parse that when you're looking at all this stuff and you're learning and you're seeing all these new ways of doing stuff? And then how do you contrast that to the fact that when you hit the field, there's basically nobody else who's going to be doing that?
Well, I think, like, to go back, like what Pat was talking about, I think I have just as much, or anybody has just as much of a right to want to excel at the game as you do to want to fool around, right? Like, however you want to play is up to you, and unless you are physically hurting somebody or limiting somebody's ability in some other way, then go for it. So that's what I really like about the game, is that it is skill-based. And if you have, if you get your skills to a certain level and you get your gear to a certain level, you can usually perform to a certain level. Yeah. So right away, I just tried to figure out what worked for me, and then started doing a bunch of research on stuff, like, watching videos or reading forums and whatnot. And at first, there's no way to pick through the bullshit because you don't know, right? At this point, playing for 10 years and trying a lot of stuff, played a lot of games, I know pretty much exactly what works for me and what doesn't, what's applicable to airsoft, which is a huge thing when you're doing research into the firearms community, because 99% of the drills, 99% of the tactics, it doesn't work when your range is less than that of a real steel pistol.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, well, I mean, we've talked about this before, but people come to airsoft and like, oh, I'm going to have the kind of range that like people with guns in video games and movies have. I mean, like, no. Nope.
Yeah.
Well, I think, in point of fact, most people don't realize that, like, forget shooting at someone. If you're just seeing another person at 300 meters away, like 900, 1,000 feet away, people don't think about what that's actually going to look like. Like in video games, you always see the other people and stuff. If someone's standing 1,000 feet away, they can be kind of hard to spot because they're not very big. And I think a lot of people aren't familiar with just trying to spot stuff and be like, oh yeah, that's 1,000 feet away. So when they go to the airsoft field, it looks like it would in a video game, which is that you people are big enough that you can see them at a distance, but your guns don't have that kind of range, right?
Yeah. And we don't really teach people anywhere in our society that I can think of how to like eyeball distance.
Well, unless you're involved with sports, right? Like, I mean, American football is a big one for people, having that like, you know, a football field as a length, right? As a comparable length. Or like I try and talk to people like, okay, a truck is basically 20 feet, right? On average, we'll say. So how many trucks can you have between you and your, you know, and even that's hard to scale out sometimes.
Yeah, for sure.
So unless like
a big truck or a small truck.
yeah, but like some people just can't aren't good at visualizing that either, right? But aside from that range conversation, like that's the biggest thing is trying to find things that will work for you and will work for airsoft.
Yeah.
And the biggest thing with that is experience. And then, you know, to get back on topic about how do I feel or when I show up to a game and I know that I got my stuff squared away and does that intimidate people? Well, for me, I want to show these newer players that, hey, this stuff works. Like, feel free to have a conversation about it with me or look at our videos or whatnot. And it's set up in a way logically, right? There's nothing on my kit that's not there for a reason. And I used to run with everything under the sun. It'd be like bags of BBs, coils of rope, whatever, right? Because I thought that was cool. I thought that, you know, that I might need that stuff. But obviously, at this point, we know that we don't. So I just want to sort of help people have more fun, because to me, it's really fun when I can reload in like half a second and then get BBs back on target instead of fumbling around for 35 seconds and getting frustrated with it.
What you're saying is actually, it's a fair comparison to like why we do the YouTube channel, because we want to help and educate people and stuff. But you raise a really interesting question, which is that if you're a beginner coming to a field and you're seeing this, like let's say it's your first time or second time ever playing airsoft, and you see like these 2-3 guys dressed in camo with their full kit squared away, guys who are looking hard, it's very easy for you to feel like, oh, well, they're the experts and they don't actually care about me. Like, they won't want to play with me because I'm this new guy, I don't know anything, right? And I think that's a mentality that exists everywhere in every sort of like sport and stuff like that. But it's especially true when you're doing like these niche hobbies. But it's actually not true at all. Like, it's a complete, I mean, yeah, sure, you always have a jerk who doesn't care about some other people, but I'm talking like on average. In a niche like sport like airsoft, we actually want all these beginners, right?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I love seeing people show up with a rifle and a hoodie, because those, I've had the best games of my life with like just running with a crew of guys who are literally in sneakers, hoodie, and a rifle, because they have fun. They see how stuff works. They have no preconceived notions of what, besides like, you know, playing Call of Duty or whatnot. Yeah. And then you can just tell them right away, be like, man, if I were you, I'd get this, this, and this. Keep it simple. And then you see them back with a bit of kit, and then it builds and builds and builds and builds.
And like, seeing people get better is very, very satisfying, you know. Seeing people progress in ways where, you know, they're not buying 50-pound, you know, A&K Mark 60 to carry a machine gun when they don't realize that it weighs as much as, you know, some players on our team.
Yeah. It's like a 12-inch AR would do it.
Yeah, and like would be better because it's better machined and better manufactured too, right?
But I think that's how you get people around those issues, right? Is showing them how things work, or trying to be helpful with stuff and approach new players. Even like, you know, when we run a game and there's a few new players, more often than not, I'll try and run with those guys and get them to like, you know, do some bounding movement, do some suppression and movement and that kind of stuff, just to get them into it. And then the next time you see them out, they're doing it naturally, right? Yeah. Or you show them a tip on how to reload, and then you see the guy smoke a reload, right, when he's, you know, under pressure. And it's just, that's excellent to me.
Yeah, totally. And like this notion that like experienced players only want to run with experienced players and they don't want to play with new players. I mean, it's just completely wrong. Like you said, like not only these examples you're talking about are fun, but like you were just saying, new players are open-minded typically, and that means that you just have a good time, right? Yeah. And they're looking to have fun, and like we were saying right at the start, they don't yet have any sort of notion as to what fun in airsoft for them will be. They're just sort of happy to be out and sort of enjoying the field and stuff, as opposed to being like, oh, well, I want to go out and I want to do this specific thing, which I find fun, right?
Yeah, and I think it helps break down the issue as well of, you know, you see these players in, you know, their squared away kit. Like if 10 of us showed up at a game in all of our woodland gear with all of our cool guns spray painted and, you know, we're really squared away, then people are intimidated by that. But most of the time when I get hit, I'm hit by a guy with a gun that's a fraction of the cost of mine, who has, you know, a quarter of the gear, and we still get hit all the time.
Yeah,
right?
totally.
And as soon as that breaks, soon as that, you know, they realize that anybody can hit anybody, then the games become a lot more fun.
It doesn't matter how fashionable you look, you're still going to get shot at.
Yeah, you're still going to get hit.
Right? And I mean, one of the other things I think is sort of worth mentioning here is that by and large, like, we're all here playing airsoft with toy guns, dressing up cool. Like, you know, we are, in point of fact, kind of nerdy about this specific thing. And, you know, if you're looking at people with kit and you're curious how it works, right? Virtually no one who you meet in an airsoft field is going to go, no, man, I don't want to talk to you about this cool gun or why I'm using this specific one. And most of them will also let you, like, shoot it and have a look at it.
Yeah.
So veteran players may look intimidating by dint of the fact that we're geared up and scary looking. Almost all of us are like, yeah, no, I want to talk to you about my cool toys. Like,
yeah. And as you were saying before, one of the big things for us is, you know, we want to help players and other people out by sharing our opinions, right? But they might think that what we have to say is bullshit. But, like, the bottom line is we've been doing this for enough time that we can sort of look at everyone on the field and say, oh, yeah, well, it's sort of like, not like rank them in how good they are, but like in their level of experience to say, okay, well, this guy's just starting out. And then in a couple of years, you know, this is where they'll be and so on. Because we've seen that progression. But we've also seen that progression in ourselves too, right? We're here doing this podcast and we're, you know, really confident about the stuff that we're talking about. But 5 years ago, we would have had a different conversation, but the exact same sort of confidence level.
Yeah, so I think it's important to always try and understand your perspective and try and understand or just even think about somebody else's perspective. Like what I try and do when I see a new player, I think, what does he think about looking at me? I look at him as like, is he just standing around by himself? Is he fiddling around with his rifle? Does he not understand how it works? Right? So I know if I was a new player, I would totally appreciate somebody coming up to me and giving me some helpful advice, right? Not overloading me, but just, you know, being friendly and whatnot. So I think that's the first step in sort of understanding people's perspectives. And it's the same when you see other types of players. Like if I see somebody at doing like sort of speed soft, I know nothing about that, right? But he's just as welcome to do that as I am to do sort of more of a Milson thing.
Yeah.
And understanding that you can have 12 different types of players on a team. And as long as you sort of work together, it's still going to be a good game.
Yeah. Actually, you just prompted something really interesting too, which is that as you get more experience, right, as you become a quote unquote veteran player and your gear is squared away, fewer and fewer people are likely to make recommendations to you about your kit. Like outside of our team members, nobody has ever made any recommendations to me about how I should set up my kit. It's never happened. Either because I look squared enough away that people don't feel it's necessary, or they just don't feel that it's appropriate for them to do that. And so that being said, you also need to fall back into this realm that you were talking about at the start, which is you need to start researching and doing your own research because you're not going to get that feedback from anybody else.
No,
right?
that's right. You've got to become, if you want to improve, you've got to become critical of yourself, right? In a constructive way. It's no good to like every time you get hit, go, oh man, I'm garbage at this. It's like, why did you get hit? Was it something that you did? Was it luck? Was it whatever, right? And then from there, you can start to break it down and sort of build your gear, build your gun towards getting better.
Yeah, it's that being a self-motivated learner, right? Like you need to go assess what you're doing right and what you're doing wrong, and then go try to poke at how to fix it. And I also think you need to be sort of willing to look at it and go, give things a try. Try more than one approach to setting up your kit. Try moving your pouches around if you've got Molly, right? Swap your AK with your friend's M4. Just trade for a day, right? A lot of the best sort of skill growth I've gotten in airsoft, other than you guys yelling at me and telling me to stop doing dumb shit, is just bombing other people's stuff and trying different ways of playing.
Yeah.
But you also have this subset of people who don't really care about improving, right? They just want to go out there and have fun. And they're the ones who are quite likely to go, okay, well, this isn't fair because those guys are too good. So how do you deal with that?
Well, I think that there's a couple different ways to deal with it. I think that, again, understanding their perspective. So, I mean, if we're playing a quick team deathmatch and we've got 3 or 4 people on our team that just want to rush or just have a laugh, let them do what they're going to do and make a plan around that, right? There's no need to get frustrated because you can't get everybody to cooperate in how you see fit, right? Because you could very well ruin their day if you tried to be all, hardcore, barking orders at them.
Yeah.
So there's no need of that, right? If somebody responds to that and that's how you want to play, then that's fine. But you shouldn't impose your will on somebody else to make the game go how you want it to, right? So being able to recognize that stuff. And then just even like the simplest question that I always find works is, why do you have your kit set up in that way? Or why did you do this? And not in like a condescending way at all, just general curiosity, right? It's like, why did you choose to do this, right? And if they have a good explanation for it, well, then that's fine. Maybe it just didn't work out. But what you'll find more often than not is people can't come up with an answer because that's just how they do it, then you might spark the, oh, okay, I see where this guy's coming from now, right?
Right, yeah.
And you could motivate them to perhaps look into other means.
Yeah, well, you're better off asking people questions about their kit than you are just walking up and being like, that's dumb.
Yeah,
no one's
exactly.
going to respond positively to that. That's not going to help anybody.
Yeah. Well, and like, you know,
I mean, except me. It helps me.
but it's a great way to prove a point as well. It's like we do it at our team practices all the time. Like, you know, somebody will say, just for instance, reload in a certain way, and it might be a way that is much less efficient than they could have done. And then you say, why do you do that? And then they explain it, and then you reload and you show them, oh, I just cut a second off of that. Obviously, this is empirically, this makes more sense, right? Mm-hmm. And then they could have an aha moment, right?
One of the things you've talked to me about recently, Chris, that I think is really relatable is this idea of adding value. Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I guess this goes back to what we were talking about previously with, you know, I enjoy getting better at airsoft, like most things. Like I want to just continuously improve. So one of the things I've been trying to do lately is really be thinking and pay attention while I'm playing to am I adding value to the situation? So whether that's is my position optimal to help my team? Is there something that I could be doing in a lull in you know, fire or whatnot? And I think that's important to really be able to grow, especially when you get past the beginner stages, we'll say, mm-hmm. when you become an intermediate player or even a more advanced player. You know, you're not going to improve 10, 20% a year. You're going to improve 1 or 2% maybe, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got to constantly be looking for those little things that are going to add up. So it could be value added of, I'm going to carry a few more mags for my buddy, yeah. right? Or it could be value added that, you know what, instead of rushing so much, I'm going to stay back a little bit and try and be a little smarter, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And I think it ties in really well with sort of this idea. So you're, I think, justifiably infamous on our team for walking by in the middle of a firefight and going, hey, Pat, are you useful where you are? And like, there are people who would take that and be like, man, Chris is being kind of mean. But it's an extremely important question mm-hmm. for me to ask myself whenever I'm doing stuff. And yeah, for you to ask me as you walk by if you don't think I'm positioned as effectively as I could be, right? You know, like my rifle, as we've discussed before, does have the range to sort of do backline work. But that doesn't mean it's where I'm most effective all of the time, mm-hmm. right? And cutting ego out of that and allowing that question to just be, hey, am I where I should be? Am I doing what I'm doing is really, really important. But it's also a thing where if you walk past a new player and you're like, hey, are you where you should be? Like, are you effective? You might ruffle feathers.
Exactly. And that's like, I find myself in that situation a lot because generally when we do a defense game or we do something like that, I'm usually in the position where I'm floating between cover or our lines or whatnot to sort of supplement, you know, our coverage. And I will ask you guys that, but I would definitely not approach a new player and say, hey, you know, are you doing a good job here? Are you useful? Right?
Yeah.
Like, you know, I know you guys know what I mean, but to the new player, he's got a completely different perspective, right? And I try and think about that stuff, and that's where that value added comes back into, right?
Totally. And like, I mean, my point is sort of that you're not being a drill sergeant with us. And like, I'm sure to an outsider, it might look like that, mm-hmm. but I don't want people to come away from our content and think, oh man, like I really need to go, you know, yelling at people. It's not an effective way to motivate most of the people who are playing airsoft, really. Like, and don't get me wrong, you'll find people who are like, oh man, that's hilarious. Yeah, light me up. But mm-hmm. on the sort of other side of the spectrum, when someone is yelling at you at airsoft to like move or try to do something, try to take it as, yeah, let's try that. Let's take this as good advice and see how it works.
Yeah, because there's a piece here around using that sort of mentality to bridge the gap between different perspectives and mindsets, right? If you have someone on your team who maybe is just doing this for fun and they don't care about getting better, you can still use that mindset of, okay, well, how do we get them to add value mm-hmm. without necessarily making them feel like he's bossing me around and that's not what I'm here for, right?
Yeah, and I think the biggest part of that I found to work is when you're in a situation like that and we are moving players around, or even with new people, like explaining the situation, and then we'll move them to a position that sees, say, a lot more action than somewhere where I place myself. So then they sort of see how it works and see that overall when we play as a team, you know, the game is much more fun and we do better. Mm-hmm. And then that sort of instills that, oh, okay, I see, you know.
And I think there's a lot of value for like senior players in the community to both take jobs they know are going to be less fun so that newer players can do the more shooting heavy parts of the game, because especially the newest players are the
Yes.
most involved, the most engaged by that. And to lead from the front, right? To lead by example.
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah,
I'd never take a new player and get them to like, for let's say we're both behind a piece of cover and it's me and a new player and I'm like, all right, I'll cover you, you move. I will never ever do that because they don't want to move. And plus, you know, I don't necessarily know if they understand what I mean. But if I tell them, hey, cover me, I can basically, you can be sure they will come around that corner and start shooting their gun like a crazy person, which is all I really need.
Yeah.
And then to Pat's point, I can lead by example by moving. And when I get there, I can call them over to me, right?
Exactly. And then next time they'll know what to do.
Yeah.
Right. And then that becomes like, that was successful. That clicks the little part in our monkey brain that goes, ooh, I like that.
And if you come out of that cover and get shot in the face, at least that gives them that moment of, oh, yeah, he's getting shot too, which is genuinely helpful to new players, right?
Oh, of course. And just to another point about, you know, choosing roles for newer players, same, like we've had lots of games where the commander position has been vacated for whatever reason. And there's no way that you could put a newer player into, you know, their first milsim in a sort of commander role, right? Like that would, first of all, the game would go completely awry and it's not going to be fun for anybody, right? So I'd really like to encourage, you know, more experienced players to actually take the positions that need experience, right? And then you're taking, sure, you might not get to shoot as much, but everybody's going to have a much better time.
And like, I guarantee you, your first time playing as the commander at a milsim game, you're going to make a right mess of it. You know, like, unless you have, you know, like, real forces experience commanding dudes and some degree of strategy. Like,
And even then,
even then it's going to be very hard, right? Making 100 people act as a unit to do a thing is a complicated and difficult gig, but it is really rewarding and really fun. And yeah, especially if you're a player who's been playing for a long time and you're doing stuff like that, yeah, step up.
Yeah.
Right. A thing that I'm embarrassed by, and I've mentioned this before, is that for a really long time, you know, I'd come out to an airsoft game and like I read books about strategy and tactics in my spare time and have forever, but I'd just stand there, be like, yeah, whatever, someone else can make the plan. I don't care. I'm just here to get trigger time and mess around. And that was very much just a matter of me being lazy, and that was dumb. That was just terrible of me in the sense that I had value I could be contributing to what was going on that would allow us to do better often. And so it's a thing that I've had to work to step up to. And I think I do a better job of being like, no, let's do this. You know, it doesn't always work.
Yeah, well, that's just an example of your perspective shifting, right? And you seeing that value added, right?
so if we come back to what we initially said at the start, different players view the game differently depending on what their experience is and what they find fun. The trickiest part is really bridging that gap, right? It's especially in our kind of community, which is relatively small, right? If we have 50 players at a game, that's a pretty big game, right? And those 50 players are not all going to have the same mindset. It's not like, you know, signing up to go to Milsim West where everyone is on board to do exactly this one thing.
Yeah, we all paid money to come do a thing. But like with Milsim West, you're like, yeah, I paid money to come play a big Milsim.
Well, exactly. Whereas, you know, a random skirmish with all these different people, you're going to have this mix of people like us who are, let's say, Milsim adjacent, right? And then you have other players who are there for Speedsoft or vice versa, or players who are just content to do everything, right? We've talked a little bit about this so far, but like, what are we doing to bridge that gap?
And the answer's got to be talking to people and being respectful and being friendly. You know, I was saying earlier, like, I'm an intimidating looking dude. You know, I'm a big, daunting fellow when I'm geared up, especially. So I try to make a point of, like, going and talking to the new players, going and chatting with them. These days, I feel like I get a little bit much of the fact that I teach at the schools that some of them go to. So I'm like, hey, man, how's it going? Happy to get to shoot your teacher today. Like, which never fails to please them. It's that, you know, being personal, being friendly, being approachable, and making the approach yourself and trying to bridge that gap. And everyone needs to do it, right?
Yeah, and really trying to integrate everybody might not be the greatest approach. I think if it's people you're just meeting for the first time, or if it's mixed groups, and there's a lot of mixed groups, like even as simple as asking people, you know, at the beginning of the games, like, what do you want to do in this game? Like, that's a situation we find ourselves in all the time. If we're doing a 10 or 12 versus 10 or 12, you know, we've got 3 or 4 of our guys. We know what we want to do as the overall strategy, and then you need to sort of fit or try and fit the other people's expectations into that. So, like, if right when we're forming a plan, if you simply just ask those other players, it's like, hey, what do you want to do? If they want to rush a particular building, or if they want to set up in a certain place, well, then just allow them to do that. Not as if you have any real authority anyway, because it's
right.
airsoft. But then just work your plan around that, right?
And I mean, it's funny because you say you have no authority, but like if I show up at Frontline, we're playing, a 12 on 12, and I take a second at the beginning of the game, I take a knee, I draw a little map in the dirt, and I say, all right, these are the things we need to do to win. People are going to look at me and go, oh, I guess this guy knows what he's talking about just because I've taken the initiative to do that. And I mean, in point of fact, at this point, I can say I probably do have a decent idea of what we need to do to win most of the game modes that get played there.
Yeah.
I can then go, does anyone want to do any of this?
Exactly.
And like, if it's just my team, I'll go, all right, so like we know how to do this. Cool, right? If it's, just all of us, great. But if it's a bunch of other players, it's like, all right, so who wants to do what? And then if there are a bunch of new players, you often get new players going like, well, I don't know what I want to do. And you're like, all right, well, like, I'll generally say, hey, you go with, Chris, you go with Phil, you go with players I know who have leadership skills who'll try to, model good play for you. And also try to make sure you have fun. But like that's not exclusively people on our team.
No.
There are lots of other players in the community who I know I can absolutely hand, a couple of players who are here for their first game, who are running rentals, and be like, make sure these guys have fun, and they'll do it.
Yeah.
Have you ever had the experience of you asking someone to do something and they go like, no, I'm not doing that?
Not really. What usually happens is they agree and then they don't do it.
Okay, yeah.
So I think that's another good point is you've got to be realistic with it. So if we have a bunch of new players, I would probably, if they're cool with being split up, I'd much rather have a new player go with each experienced player and work in buddy teams that way instead of just splitting up like, okay, I want all my more experienced players on one side and then all my, other players on the other side.
Yeah.
Because like we said before, new guys with hoodies and rifles, they get just as many kills as us usually.
Yeah, that's right.
Right. So
absolutely. And like, it's also one of these things where, as we've talked about before, there are days when you feel like the cover has gravity and you're stuck to it, right? And that's true of new players as much as true of veteran players, right? Like that's a two-way street. But looking at a group of, like 6 friends who've just shown up for their first airsoft game and going, all right, I need you to go seize this objective. Probably not the most sensible approach if you are trying to sort of take an organizational role before the game starts.
And like Chris said, I mean, even if they say, yeah, sure, no problem, chances are they're probably not going to do that thing.
Because they don't understand. And then that's your fault if you're upset by that because you did not communicate that. And you should know that they don't know, right?
That's
it's
right.
The same as you can tell a toddler to go change the tires in your car and he'll say, yeah. Is that going to get done? No.
Nope.
If you think it is, then that's your problem.
And if it does get done, well, then it's some sort of miracle, but it's not what you should have expected.
No, exactly. Yeah, but I think that's what's most important is just trying to integrate everybody and try and just lead through example, right? Like show them, like break up the team, get some experienced guys mixed in with it, show them how to, use cover appropriately and all that stuff. And if everything is working out, they will see that, oh, it's working out because we worked as a team because we did it this way.
Yeah, that's a fair. So if you're the kind of player who is getting rumblings at the field that people think you try too hard, the best thing then for you to do is to reach out to the community and say, how do you approach that, right?
Make yourself more approachable. And I mean, I'm just assuming because I'm sure people have thought that about me, whereas my mindset is all about, I'm not trying to be better because I want to be better than you. I'm trying to be better because I want to be better than I was.
Yeah.
Right. And that's 100% it. Right. Mm-hmm. And have a bit of humility on the field too. Right. Like, if you get shot by a new player, congratulate them. Right. Say, man, like, nice shot. It's a sport really. So have a bit of sportsmanship. Right.
That was one of the big reasons too. We put our names on our plate carriers or like we have our name tapes. Is because we wanted people to know what our names were, not because it's like, oh, I want you to know how badass I am, but it's like, no, I want you to know my name, although nobody knows how to say my name, but that's fine. But we want you to know our names because we want you to feel comfortable being like, oh, this is Lodge, right? This is Warren, this is whomever. And you can tell because they've got their name on the carrier, so then you feel maybe a bit more comfortable in approaching them, right? Yeah.
I think, Chris hit the nail on the head, right? This is a sport. It's about sportsmanship. So if you win, win with grace. Compliment the other guys on the stuff they did well, and also be chill about getting shot because I remember when I was a kid, there was a guy on my street who used to want to come and like shoot people with water guns, but he didn't want to get wet. Yeah. And like, you can't take that attitude to airsoft, right? You're going to get shot. Awesome. Compliment people. Yep. Tell people, man, like, good shot, good job.
Well, try and learn
right?
from it.
Try to learn from it. Try to, go, oh, how do I not get shot like that again? But also just be chill, be friendly.
You just raised a really good point too, which in thinking about it, I'm almost always more impressed by what other people on the field do, like, to me and to my team, than I am impressed by what I do myself. Yep. Right? It's very, very, very seldom that I do something and I'm like, yeah, Phil, you did a good job. Whereas I'm looking at other players going like, man, these guys are great.
Yeah.
Right? That's not, I'm not trying to toot my own horn. It's just, that's the way that I've always perceived it, right?
Yeah, I'll tell you every time I get shot in a game, but I will not be able to tell you how many players I hit. No idea.
Yeah.
Don't know. Not that it doesn't matter, but you hit the player and then that's just another check in the box to win the game, right?
Yeah.
And
yeah, and every now and then you have, that 6-on-6 where you're like, oh man, I got 5 of them.
Yeah.
And that does feel good, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
Or that first round hit, like...
right? That sweet feeling. But I don't think you should be playing for that. And I know we aren't playing for that, right? Mm-hmm. What Phil was saying is really relatable to me. Like, I often joke both with the team and with other people, I'm the worst storm rider.
That's true.
Thank you. But, my point is not that I think I'm a shitty player. Like, I know my way around an airsoft game. I can be a very effective player. I often am. But, often I'm looking at other people going like, how do you do that?
The overall point to make with this is that if you feel that players think that you are trying too hard, or if you don't want to come off that way, just try and be more approachable. Try and explain to people through example and conversation about why you do the things that you do, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, if you want to spend $15,000 and get all the new Cry stuff, then that's your right? That doesn't make you better than anybody, but you also shouldn't really be judged by it.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Yeah.
There's a really, really heavy tendency in airsoft to think, the gear makes the man, the aesthetic makes the player, and it doesn't. The mindset makes the player, right?
Totally.
I would rather have a player who not necessarily is super intense about winning, but wants to play and play well and accomplish objectives, right? Who wants to try to improve themselves with a Walmart M4 than a guy who doesn't care about improving themselves and who isn't motivated to play with a $2,000 super tuned, beautiful rifle. Mm-hmm. Because one of those is going to be more help to me.
Yeah.
And it comes back to the central piece of the conversation, which is what people find fun, right? And you can show up and you can spend $15,000 on the Cry stuff or on thermals or whatever, and because that's what you find fun. And in which case, fill your boots, like I always say. But to Chris's point, I think if we're trying to bridge these different mindsets, the best way to do that is to talk about why, right? And it's very easy to assume that because someone has all this cool kit that, like we're saying at the start, they are firstly really good, which we know is not necessarily the case, but also that they have an attitude and they'll look down on people who don't have that sort of kit. And right, like you were saying, that's almost never the case, and it's definitely not the case with us for sure. But the only way you can establish that is by having those conversations, right?
Yeah, well, as we talked about also in some recent episodes, I've gotten sort of into the reenacting side of the World War II stuff, and there are a lot of people in that who want to be very aggressive with new players about their double-buckled boots being the wrong thing for them to have for the period of stuff they're doing. And I think you can have that conversation with someone in a chill, hey man, did you know way. But I think that you'll find if you go talk to people in person at airsoft stuff, that you're very seldom going to find someone who's going, hey, idiot. And mostly people are just willing to chat with you about their stuff, Maybe that guy who has the thermals is I work offshore half the year, so I make a lot of money and I don't have a family, so I'm just going to buy cool shit.
I think it's a pretty interesting conversation. I think there's a lot to be said about having conversations with people in your communities and, building those bridges. Before we close it out today, Chris, do you have any dad advice for us?
Oh, man. I guess it's just to, going back to the perspective thing, when you see a new player or a player with kit that's different than yours, or they're going in a different direction than you think is the quote-unquote right direction, just try and put yourself in their shoes, see what value they think they're adding, and then you might, be surprised. Right.
Fair enough. It's like the old saying, if you're going to judge someone, walk a mile in their shoes. Exactly. That way, when you judge them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes.
Yeah, exactly.
So, guys, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you next week. Thanks to Chris for being here with us today as well.
Thanks for popping by, Chris.
Anytime, guys.
Have a good week, everyone.